even though I'm playing rock and, playing strong and have my chops feel good, I need to just maintain the jazz ride cymbal, especially up tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So no substitute for that other than putting in some time and keeping your jazz ride beat going.
So it was actually quite natural for you to going from the jazz club to on stage with Journey.
When I left Berklee, I passed an audition with Jean-Luc Ponty. And that's when I made a transition from playing on a small jazz drum set to a double bass jazz fusion drum set. I had 2 kits, one with a 12-inch tom and a 14-inch tom and an 18-inch bass drum. Then I had another Gretsch kit with a 20-inch bass drum and a 13-inch tom and a 16. So I just put those 2 together. So when you see this video, like the drum set doesn't even match. It's just this kind of little Gretsch kit. And after about a month of me playing that, he said, "Can you get a Billy Cobham kit?" And so, of course, what he meant by that was like double bass drum, 3 rack toms, 2 floors. And in January 77, I bought my first Sonar kit. My first year attending Berklee was the first year that Gary Chaffee was teaching at Berklee. He was my teacher, very much a mentor, and a very brilliant thinker. He had 2 concepts that I really resonated with. One was the idea of odd rhythms, and then the other was the idea of stickings. And along the way, of course, I met Jim Chapin. He's known for quite a few things, and very important to drum culture, he wrote the book about jazz independence, which when it was published, people didn't even think it was possible to play that book. Jim Chapin, in a lot of ways, was mainly about the hands. But Freddie Gruber got into the details of the hand technique, but also bass drum technique and hi-hat technique. Freddie introduced me to another motion other than this, that, the Chapin would say it's like turning a doorknob, right? You want this kind of. But then Freddie also introduced me to a method where the stick travels this way. The key to becoming a very strong jazz drummer is your ride cymbal playing. It's not so important playing rock because you don't play you don't play this. You just play, maybe eighth notes or quarter notes. When I was touring with Journey, my chops felt very strong. But then I went and played and did some big band gigs right after, and my jazz ride cymbal beat had diminished.
Steve, welcome to Open-Minded Drumming. We're very excited to have you here. We're looking forward to learn from you, different stories, different things about your drumming journey, and maybe some more stuff about Jim Chapin, your experience with Konnakol and all that. So without further ado, maybe Claudio, take it from there, and let's just have a fun drum talk. All yours, gentlemen.
Hello, everybody. It's an incredible honor for me to do this talk with Steve and with all of you. And Klaus sends his best wishes, Steve. And
Claudio, good to see you. We're old friends. We've known each other for a very long time, going back to the days when I was teaching at Rhythm, the drum camp in Marktoberdorf. And in fact, we were both studying Indian rhythms and Konnakol with Karuna Murthy from South India. And so I'm glad to hear that you have a Konnakol course, because when I do Konnakol live at my gigs, I'm always having people ask me how they can learn. And there really hasn't, I always say you have to find a teacher, because there really hasn't been much offered in the way of instruction for Konnakol. So that's really cool that you have a course.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And there's also one composition, actually one corbe in this course that you taught me, Steve. I'm really happy. Yeah, it's the ta ka di mi ta di ka ta ko ta ka di mi ta di ka ta ko ta di ka ta ko ta ka di mi ta di ka ta ko ta di ka ta ko ta di ka ta ko ta ta di ka ta ko ta di ka ta ko ta di ka ta ko ta ta di ka ta ko ta di ka ta ko ta di ka ta ko ta.
All right.
You taught me that one.
Yeah, that's good. Ta, ka, di, mi, ta, ta. Okay, check this one out. Variation. So that's like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, right?
Exactly.
Going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you do the taka, dimi, and then 2 6s. So you can do like, that's just a foundational one. And then instead of the taka dimi, you could do make those 5s. Ta, ka, di, mi, da di kiditum ta, ka, di, mi, da di kiditum, da di kiditum ta, ka, di, mi, da di kiditum, da di kiditum, da di kiditum. And I got lost in there. But it's the same idea, but instead of 1, 2, 3, 4 with 4 beats in between, you do 5 beats, and then instead of the 6, you do a 5.
Fantastic. Exactly. This one is even in the course as well. You gave me the variation as well. I covered all 3. I remember the day when we were
one with the 3 and the 7.
Exactly. It's in the course. You taught me this lesson in Paderborn at the drum festival. We were
Just
sitting
last weekend. I got to play it with Selva Ganesh.
Oh yeah,
Live game.
Amazing.
So that's good. Anyway, that's we shouldn't get too deep into that for everyone, but that's very interesting stuff.
Absolutely, and I mean it's an incredible honor for us to have you here today, to have you join this open-minded drumming drum talk. And I mean you're one of the finest drummers of all time, and it's incredible to have you. Thank you so much. I mean and we all know, I mean the list is very long with whom you worked, from Journey to Steps Ahead to Vital Information and Hiromi Trio, Mike Stern and Zakir Hussain's Masters of Percussion. It's an incredible to look back on your musical career, and I get goosebumps having you here, talking to you every time.
Well, thank you. Well, where should we start? Where would you like to start a discussion?
Well, I would like to actually, because when I think about music, the teacher-student lineage always kind of was very essential for me. So I would like to ask you about your teachers, like maybe even to start with your first teacher. Like how was it? How did your first teacher was Bill Flanigan, right? And what, maybe could you tell us a bit about your teachers, about your relationship with your teachers? For example, what was
that's a good question. So I was fortunate that when I wanted to pick up drumming, and for me it happened, I was 9 years old. It was I was in the 4th grade, and there was an assembly at my school, and somebody demonstrated instruments, and I chose to play the snare drum. So I didn't start with a drum set. I started with a snare drum, and I wanted to be in the school band. But my dad worked in the town nearby, and there happened to be a drum shop around the corner from where he was working in a local newspaper. And that teacher was Bill Flanigan, and luckily he turned out to be a fantastic teacher. And so the year was 1963. If we know anything about music history, he wasn't even into bebop. He was into swing. So that means like Buddy Rich style, Louis Bellson style. And the drummers that came out of that big band era. In a way, I feel like that was a very fortunate place for me to start drumming. So he started 2 years, I just played the practice pad. and then 1 year on the snare drum. So he really focused on my hand technique and reading. And then eventually we got he said, okay, I'm ready for a drum set. So after 3 years, I got a drum set. And then, of course, we started with the Jim Chapin book, the Independence book that he wrote of how to play the jazz ride cymbal and then various syncopated rhythms between the left hand and the right foot on the snare and the bass drum. We used the Ted Reed syncopation book for that. So by the time I graduated high school, I had studied with him, for many years. And also I studied basic mallets with him because in those years he was like a complete percussionist. So you had to play vibes and you had to play timpani. Wow. And then he recommended that I took piano lessons, which I did when I was in high school. So I had, fundamental knowledge of major and minor scales and chords. And so by the time I graduated high school, I was in very good shape to do a good job going to the Berklee College of Music in 1972. Oh, yeah. So I graduated high school in June and then went to Berklee in September. So I was, my first year teaching there, my first year attending Berklee was the first year that Gary Chaffee was teaching at Berklee. And that was September 1972. And he was my teacher, again, very much a mentor and a very brilliant thinker and musician that came up with a lot of interesting concepts. And he had two concepts that I really resonated with. One was the idea of odd rhythms. And, he really got into like playing groups of five, either groups of five, like over eighth notes, triplets or 16th notes, or quintuplets. And then, groups of seven, groups of nine, which, eventually with the Indian music, I became, one of the reasons I think I became attracted to that, those rhythms and learned them quickly is because of the training I had with Gary Chaffee in my early years with him. There was like 4th, 5th, and 6th grade in one school, so I could be in the school band. And the band director started teaching me the snare drum, but he wasn't a drummer. And wisely, my parents decided to find me a teacher, a private teacher that was a drummer. And when I went to Bill Flanigan, my guess is, and it's hard for me to know because I was a kid, but he was probably around 60 himself, which means like his orientation would have been, would have been like 30 years old in the 1930s and 40 years old in the 1940s. And so he was coming from the swing era. And meaning he was a big band swing drummer. So my orientation is very much coming out of swing and coming out of jazz drumming. And he was a mentor type. Like I had a weekly lesson, so I did develop good habits of having a lesson, say, on Monday afternoon, and then practicing all week, including a lot of extra practice on the weekends, and then go to my lesson. And I really wanted to do a good job for myself, but also for him. And he was a good mentor in that ideal student teacher and mentor relationship is the student wants to do well for the mentor's approval. And so I did have a very good experience with that. But still, being a freshman in a music college, you have to work your way up. And, I didn't just walk in and do an amazing job or anything like that. I just came in, I did a good job, but then I had a good foundation. So I was relatively quickly, within 2 years, was able to work up to be one of the most, let's say, in-demand drummers for ensembles and for gigs outside Berklee. And luckily, I met another amazing teacher. And then the other concept that he had that was really resonated with me was the idea of stickings. And he would create different stickings for those different rhythms that because I had spent so much time with the rudiments, I had a very good ability to mix double strokes and single strokes, which is so much of what the rudiments entails, especially with the different types of paradiddles, single paradiddles, inverted paradiddles, double paradiddles, paradiddle diddles, etc. And then with him coming up with the sticking idea, for instance, two very common ways of playing a group of 5 would have been just right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2. So every time I saw a group of 5, if I used that sticking, that made it a little easier to hear that group of 5. Or another version that did symmetrically reverse itself is right, left, left, right, right, left, right, right, left, left, right, left, left, right, right, left, right, right, left. Versus. So both are very useful. They just have different applications. And so, again, great teacher, great mentor. And then, again, I was super fortunate the next year to study with Allan Dawson.
Oh, yeah.
And then that was deep into the jazz study, once more like swing, straight ahead. And his focus was learning song forms and being really clear about playing the form of a tune. So every week I had to learn a new jazz standard, be able to sing the melody and play the lesson, which was generally either from the stick control book or it was from Ted Reed's Syncopation, with various ways of playing those rhythms, but singing like a blues progression or rhythm changes or Stella by Starlight or whatever. So I became really tuned into playing the form of songs, which when, musicians play together, they want a drummer that's real clear about what it is that the musicians are playing, and being tuned into the song form makes all the difference of how a drummer can shape each chorus, one chorus after another, when you're real clear on the form. So those lessons were amazing. And then by the third year I was at Berklee, I went back to Gary Chaffee. And by that time, Vinnie Colaiuta had started coming to Berklee. So Vinnie's a couple of years younger than me. So when he came to Berklee, I had met him at a gig about a month before Berklee started. And we ended up taking lessons together from Gary Chaffee, because the lessons were 30 minutes, and we opted for a 1-hour lesson together because essentially we were working on the same material, and it was a lot of fun to take the lesson together. Gary had 2 drum sets that are just, bass drum to bass drum facing each other, so we could work on the material in the lesson. And then we did a lot of practicing outside, at our apartments, or I was in an apartment, he was in a dorm, and then we'd go to his mom's house or my mom's house and practice. So those were very formative years, and I had some great direction. And I'll take a little pause here if you have any questions. But then my next great mentors happened to be Freddie Gruber and Zakir Hussain, then fast forward. And along the way, of course, I met Jim Chapin. And even though Jim Chapin, in a lot of ways, he's known for quite a few things. And one, I would say, very important to drum culture, he wrote the book about jazz independence, which when it was published, I think it was like the late 30s or early 40s, people didn't even think it was possible to play that book.
Yeah.
And it was based on the kind of rhythms that drummers like Roy Haynes and Max Roach and Kenny Clark were playing. They were actually playing those types of rhythms, but none of those drummers, from my knowledge, studied formally. Like when people played jazz in those days, it was the music of the culture, the music of the streets. So they played it as naturally, as a drummer coming up in a different era would have learned R&B or hip hop or rock drumming. It was just the drumming that was going on in the world, in the U.S. essentially, and in a way, Jim Chapin kind of codified a lot of that vocabulary with that book. So it's a good fundamental book for getting into the jazz drumming vocabulary, which then everything came out of. All the rest of the drumming, drum set drumming, in a way, comes out of jazz drumming. It's the precursor to rock drumming or any other kind of drumming that came after jazz. And then the other thing, he's well known for the Moeller technique, and continuing along the lines of what Jim studied when he studied with Sanford Moeller. And so I would sit with Jim generally like at a NAMM show, or the Music Mess Up. And we would just sit with some pads, a couple pads and a pair of sticks, and, he'd inspect my playing and give me ideas. But I'll just say, luckily, I grew up with learning Moeller technique from a very young age because my teacher, Billy Flanigan, was playing with that conception, as well as I believe he studied with George Lawrence Stone, the writer of Stick Control. So all in all, it ended up helping me get very good hand technique from an early age, which then I've just continued to refine over the years.
Yeah, I see.
May I jump in?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Because actually, Steve, you're talking a little bit about your education, and I have two pretty relevant questions for that time. So maybe I'll just ask them. Those two questions are kind of similar, so I'll ask them both. First one is from Nasser. Can you talk about studying with Freddie Gruber and his approach to drumming? And the second question is from Pedro from Chile. Knowing Moeller's perspective from Jim and having studied with Freddie Gruber, what would you say are the main differences and similarities between their approaches to technique or in general? So those two questions.
All right, good questions. Well, Freddie Gruber's conception, as far as approaching the drum set, and as a teacher with a student, from my perspective, is the most globally, it's like I would say holistic and globally oriented, meaning it wasn't just about the hands. It was about the hands and the feet and how everything works together. Whereas some of the other, like my first teacher, Billy Flanigan, the main teaching was about the hands. Jim Chapin, in a lot of ways, was mainly about the hands. But Freddie Gruber got into the details of the hand technique, but also bass drum technique and hi-hat technique. So that's why it was a little more globally, like a holistic type of approach. And it was very centered on time playing and the swing pulse. So he wanted the way you drop the stick to also correspond to the way your bass drum beater played the bass drum and came off the head. So there was a lot of connection of integrating your body into playing in a way that really moved the music forward in kind of a beautiful feeling. And a lot of people I see, like they're trying to find, well, how come this guy Freddie Gruber could teach all these people, but he wasn't a player himself? And it's true that Freddie wasn't a working drummer at the time that he really developed as a teacher. He was originally, way back, if you go way back to his history. But by the time he got into teaching, he didn't really play, and I would say he probably wasn't like this great drummer that could sit down and demonstrate a whole lot of amazing stuff. But he had incredible powers of observation and could look at a drummer playing and then have very relevant insights into how they could improve their playing and go to the next step. So I don't even think he had a systematic way of teaching that he taught everyone the same thing. He taught me what I needed for me to take a step forward, as well as Dave Weckl. When Dave Weckl went to him, it would be specifically something Dave needed to move forward. And the way Freddie talked about it was to get out of your own way. And what he meant by that was, in general, one way a drummer can get in their own way is if they are used to making a stroke, and then that stroke stops, and then you have to start over again by picking the stick up. This is one aspect. And Moeller gets into that, when you talk about this, these kind of strokes that self-propel themselves. But Moeller was only one part of Freddie's teaching conception. So once, because he knew that I started with the Moeller technique, so he helped me perfect that. So let me just give you an example with the traditional grip left hand. So this is kind of traditional, Moeller, where there's an accent and then two notes that are rebounding with a pickup, and then very important that you have a good balance point so you can maintain that. But with the Moeller, it requires an accent, a pretty solid accent. So in a way, my Moeller usage is if my dynamic range is like this, it would be in the upper part of the dynamic range. Yet if I want to play softer and lower level with a little more finesse, Freddie introduced me to another motion other than this, that the Chapin would say it's like turning a doorknob, right? You want this kind of. But then Freddie also introduced me to a method where the stick travels this way. Versus. So you can hear there's a weight to that, kind of a heaviness, versus this. So the motion is this way. And then even lighter yet is like almost a reverse of Moeller. So you can hear they're very different dynamic levels, with the Moeller being the loudest. And I think that goes back to Sanford Moeller discovered these rhythms by playing a snare drum outdoors. And playing outdoors in a marching situation is very different than playing in a jazz club. Where you don't want that big sound. You need a more focused, controlled sound. So Freddie introduced me to all of these concepts, and I developed all of them, as well as different bass drum techniques and even hi-hat techniques. So I did get a lot from Freddie, and really started to get out of my own way, which I found to be very, very helpful. So there's kind of an overview of that I think Freddie's teaching included Moeller, but went beyond. It went beyond to these other kinds of techniques that I've found incredibly useful.
That's great. May I still jump in? Because there's still one more question which I think is relevant to that time. And the question is from Gino from Manila, from Philippines. So how was it like to learn with Allan Dawson, if you ever learned with him, if you had a chance to study with him? Also, do you have any exercises to clean the double strokes, or clean up the double strokes?
Yeah. So to study with Allan, I think I described it, pretty much already, that one of the main points was song form, learning song form, and being able to sing this melody and play at the same time, and solo, keeping the form. And he had very good hand technique, amazingly good hand technique. But when I studied with him and he saw my hand technique, he said, I'm not going to get into hand technique with you. Let's go into coordination ideas, because he didn't feel like I needed to study hand technique, but he did want me to study different coordination ideas. And so those are, I think they're widely known, a lot of them, like how he interpreted the Ted Reed syncopation book. And so that kind of idea is out there. And John Ramsey, who was the head of the Berklee percussion department, has written a very good book that gets into the details of Allan Dawson's teaching technique. So if you're interested in more about Allan Dawson, look up John Ramsey's book about Allan Dawson's teaching techniques. Okay, so some exercise for cleaning up the doubles. Here's one where I'm playing non-interrupted double strokes, but I'm playing them in 3, like 3/4 time, and put an accent at the beginning of each measure. So if I play 1, 2, 3, okay, and you have to play in triplets, like 1, 2, 3. This is single strokes, just so you can hear the idea, like 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. And you can hear me count and play okay? Microphones work?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's with single strokes. So it's that idea, but play it with double strokes. So we're in triplets in 3/4 time. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. Or 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3. So you can see the accent moves from the downbeat, 1, 2, 2, 3, and then it's the second note of the double for the second measure. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2. Then the left, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4. 2, 2. And that same idea works if you want to play it in 5, a group of 5. 1, 2, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then double 1. So those have been helpful for me. And now I'm demonstrating a bit of my concept from the Hudson book and DVD, Pathways of Motion, where when it comes to match grip, I find that I use 4 variations of matched grip. And here I'm concentrating on trying to be symmetrical with the match grip, which isn't always the case. I may want to play a non-symmetrical match grip, but here, symmetrical match grip, and I'll use the 3/4 method with the triplet. So it's a 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. So that's a very basic match grip. Palms down, fingers on the stick, kind of open grip. 1. Then you have like the thumbs up, more like French grip style. So 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And then what I call the Tony Williams match grip, where I'm holding them to get the biggest sound with the back of the hand. Doesn't have a lot of rebound, but it has a very wide range of motion to get a very big sound. 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 2. To the French, to the palms down, but with the hands open. And then palms down with the hands not tightly closed, but more closed. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. Daddy kita tum, daddy kita tum, daddy kita tum, daddy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Steve. I was wondering, you're so versatile and I mean, pathways of motion, there's an immense repertoire and vocabulary in there, and you're stylistically so flexible. I was wondering actually, what is the force behind all that?
The force behind it. How did that occur? It's really has to do with the fact that I started as a jazz drummer, started with this swing approach. And it also has to do with the time and place I grew up. It's very hard in modern times to be naturally versatile without a lot of study. And I didn't have to do a lot of study. I definitely have done some, and I'll explain. But in a lot of ways, because of the time I grew up in, it was natural to be versatile because it was at an earlier time of musical development. So for instance, I did say that I started in 1963 when I was in the 4th grade. So by the time I started high school, I was playing a lot of straight ahead kind of jazz, big band jazz. I was lucky enough to see all the big bands. So when you actually experience live music, that's such a good teacher versus recorded music. And recordings are incredibly helpful and valuable, and videos are helpful and quite valuable. But the best teaching is to see it in person, to be in the room when it's happening. And of course, then to play yourself, that's the most valuable. But I got to see the Buddy Rich big band, Maynard Ferguson big band, Stan Kenton's big band. And that was extremely valuable and helpful for me to get a conception of how the music is supposed to sound in the room while you're playing. And also, if you go back to the time of when Buddy Rich was making some of his classic albums, like Swingin' New Big Band or Mercy Mercy, even Buddy Rich by the late 60s, 67, 68, 69, he was playing rock charts. Mm. So even though, you'd think big band, well, big band then was very modern, and the big band drummers were playing straight ahead swing, but they were also playing rock charts. And so even to play big band then, you had to be pretty good at playing rock. But then, rock was in its early development, so it was in the air. It was just like when I would play weddings, you'd play some jazz tunes, you'd play some rock tunes. It wasn't a stretch. It was like very connected. And there wasn't even a thing called jazz rock fusion yet.
Yeah.
That hadn't even happened yet. And so the Mahavishnu Orchestra came out in 1971. And of course, there was things leading up to that. Mm. Like certain, like jazz rock period of Miles Davis, with like Bitches Brew and Tony Williams' Lifetime Emergency. People were moving in that direction. Jazz musicians were moving in the direction of incorporating rock rhythms and electric instruments into the music. So that all happened organically, and that happened while I was in high school and then the early years of Berklee. So for me to play jazz rock fusion was like a completely natural thing. It was, I was used to playing jazz. I played in a high school rock band, or played in big bands that played rock charts. But then when this idea of jazz rock fusion was being introduced, it's like most of my peers, we were all starting to play like that. It was just the way we considered modern jazz was being played.
So it was sorry.
So it wasn't a stretch. It was just very natural.
Yeah. So it was actually quite natural for you to going from the jazz club to on stage with Journey.
In a way, yes. But then I did do some, so by the time I was, when I left Berklee in 1976, it was because I passed an audition with Jean-Luc Ponty, the jazz rock violinist. And I was able to play his music, even though I hadn't really listened to him much. I heard him with the second incarnation of Mahavishnu Orchestra, but I didn't know his music, but I could read music. So when I went to the audition, I sight read his charts. I did a good job playing the music, and he wanted me to play with him and play some duets in 5 and in 7, and I was comfortable with that. So I got the gig, left Berklee, and started touring with him. And that's when I made a transition from playing on a small jazz drum set to a double bass jazz fusion drum set. When I first started with him, there's a video online of my second gig with him, which was at a TV show called Soundstage. Mm. And I had this little Gretsch kit. It was kind of a mixture. I had 2 kits. One with a 12-inch tom and a 14-inch tom and an 18-inch bass drum. Then I had another Gretsch kit with a 20-inch bass drum and a 13-inch tom and a 16. So I just put those 2 together. So when you see this video, like the drum set doesn't even match. It's just this kind of little Gretsch kit. And after about a month of me playing that, he said, "Can you get a Billy Cobham kit?" And so, of course, what he meant by that was like double bass drum, 3 rack toms, 2 floors. And in January '77, I bought my first Sonar kit because I had seen Bernard Purdy do a drum clinic in Boston on Sonar, and I thought the drums sounded amazing. I heard Jack DeJohnette play Sonar drums on records, and so I was really attracted to the Sonar sound. So 1977, I bought this big double bass kit, and I had a lot of fun playing it, and made my first album with Jean-Luc. It's called Enigmatic Ocean, 1977, recorded that. And then when that gig ended, I decided to go in that direction of jazz rock with an emphasis on the rock side, meaning I didn't want to go back to playing the small jazz kit. And I ended up doing an audition for both Freddie Hubbard and Ronnie Montrose, like, very diverse situations. So with Freddie Hubbard, I did an audition in LA that was more or less straight ahead. It had some jazz rock in it, but it was more straight ahead. It would have meant going back to playing the small 18-inch bass drum, small jazz kit. And Ronnie Montrose was a rock band, wasn't a vocal band. It was an instrumental rock band based out of San Francisco. And I opted to do that because I had played a lot of jazz up until that point, and I wanted to see what it was like to play with rock musicians on a professional level, something I had never done. And Ronnie Montrose really wanted me to stretch out, and it was an instrumental group, so he gave me a lot of space. And I was enjoying, like I said, playing the big stages. With Ponty, we were playing 1,500 to 2,500 seat theaters. And with Ronnie Montrose, it was essentially that same size venue, rocking out. And as it turned out, we were on a package tour with Journey in early 1978. It was Journey's first headline tour, first tour with Steve Perry in the band, playing the music of Infinity. And Van Halen was the opening act. It was their first tour. And they played for like 30 minutes. And then Ronnie Montrose with me played, maybe 45, 50 minutes in the middle. And then Journey would go on and play their headline set. So that tour lasted over 3 months with us touring together. And I got to know the Journey band members. And by the end of that year, they had asked me to join the group. Again, wow. Yeah. I did it because it was interesting musically. Journey was not as nearly as popular as they became over the years, and it was and we were playing theaters. It wasn't like arenas or stadiums even. It was just like 3,000 seat theaters. So I was pretty comfortable with that situation. But then I really did study more like what pro rock drummers were doing. So at that point, then I had a lot of, let's say, intuitive conception of how to play that music. But I did a pretty deep dive into John Bonham, into Charlie Watts, into Ringo, Nigel Olsson. I really enjoyed his and thought he had some great ideas playing with Elton John. And there were a lot of, I got kind of studious in some ways, mixed in with my just intuitive method of playing music and contributing drum parts. And really, for the first time, I was required to support a singer. So up until that point, I'd only played with instrumentalists. So that was that was a kind of a big change to then play with Steve Perry, who is was and is an incredible singer.
And you were in your mid-20s then, right? That was mid-20s.
I was 24. I was 24 when I started with Journey. So I, done all that stuff before when I was pretty young. And then, by the time I left Journey in 1985, I just turned 30 years old. So it all happened in a quite a short period. And Steve Perry was actually quite helpful to me as a teacher, because he was originally a singing drummer. Yeah. And so he sometimes would sit down on my drum kit and say, look, I'm looking for a feel like this to support me. So definitely learned a lot being in that in that situation. So I think my versatility comes from being open-minded. Of course,
wonderful.
That's yes. and having fundamental training of jazz coordination, and that opens the door to play any kind of music, because with jazz coordination, it's relatively easy to play any kind of drumming. And then I'm doing some research if it's a kind of music that I'm not totally comfortable and have played before, but then just jump in and allow the other musicians to give you feedback and direction, which is, I've always been, open to that, whether it was from Jean-Luc Ponty or from Ronnie Montrose for the guys in Journey or from the guys in Steps Ahead, and on to the Indian musicians that I've worked with. So, keeping that open-mindedness and doing some research when necessary. So here's another example, like, I did get a call to play on a country record once. And here's how it was related. It was originally Greg Bissonette that was called to play on a Ray Price record. Ray Price being kind of a classic country singer. But they wanted Greg because he's a great big band drummer, and this was Ray Price doing some kind of combination of country music with big band. And Greg had another gig and he couldn't make it, so he recommended me, so they called me to do the gig. Well, I hadn't really played much country, a little bit of country. So I didn't have much time to prepare, maybe I think it was a week or something. So I did a really deep dive into country, listening to country drumming, and I could hear the thread. Oh, it's swing. It's based on swing. It's like, at that point, Ray Price, it wasn't like kind of modern country, which is more like 80s rock based or something. It was more like country swing. And it was just the way, like the right played with a brush, the left hand played a cross stick, to simplify. To really simplify it, it was something like that. So I prepared and that's called the Ray Price Shuffle, I found out. And so I did this album with Ray Price, which is a really great record. It's called Prisoner of Love. Came out really well. Live, big band, strings, Ray singing live rhythm section, no click track. It was very, very old school. In a way that was like, all right. I got this U.S. drumming thing.
Amazing.
Meaning I could play any kind of style really coming out of the U.S., R&B, blues, country, because it's all based on that swing pulse.
Yeah.
And that's about the time, when I made that Hudson Music DVD, History of the USB, Drumset Technique and History of the USB, which gives a good insight into... with a jazz kind of swing background, the versatility can come rather naturally.
Fantastic. I have one last question, and I think then we have to slowly round it off and maybe move to two last people's questions.
Yeah, we have still some questions from people that I would like to ask, so go for it, Claudio.
One last question from my side.
Speed
because
questions.
I can imagine that you had to deal also with a lot of expectations and maybe pressure during your career. And is there any specific maybe strategies to overcome those that you would like to share with us?
Yes, my basic strategy is preparation. The more I can prepare for a situation, I can ease some of the stress. And because yes, as a drummer that's become known to let's call Steve Smith, he can play really hard music. Like, for instance, and I'll just say when I got a call from Hiromi to play her music, and I was, for 4 years, I was the sub drummer for Simon Phillips with Hiromi's music, and Anthony Jackson, who I had played with before, recommended me. Yeah, he can play really hard music. Well, the thing is, really hard music is always hard, no matter who you are. But it's just I have good methods of how to learn hard music, just a little bit at a time. And I know, what goes into the homework to learn the music. I couldn't just walk in and sight read that. It was far too hard. But the more I prepared, the better I felt about coming to the gig. So I do a lot of preparation. And with that gig, I think I must have had like a month or so to get ready, to learn the music, and Hiromi sent me charts, which were beautiful handwritten charts. And then I listened to the albums that Simon played, the parts, and I practiced. And you learn things a bit at a time, a little at a time, and memorize it. So that's one example of, Hiromi's music. But any time I learn any music, I take a long time to do my homework. Hopefully, if I have that time. If I don't have time to do a lot of homework, that's more stressful. But, I've had enough experiences that hopefully I'll do a pretty good job at first. And then if the gig goes on, I'll refine it by recording myself, listening, or if I can make a video, watch the video. And I'm always in the process of refining and fine-tuning my approach to playing. So, but nevertheless, definitely I have feelings of stress and anxiety just as much as a lot of people do. But, my method of coping is preparation.
Yeah, I always admired your working attitude. I mean, I remember when you were in Karunamurti's class, it took you one night, and on the next day you could do it. So it's really incredible. Your discipline and the way you work is really a role model for all of us.
Well, thank you. Yeah, but that really, like, Karuna was the South Indian teacher at Marktoberdorf, and I just really resonated with what he was teaching and able to work on it quickly, in that case, rather quickly. And then let's go. Well, okay, what's next? Let's go.
That sounds great, Steve. Because we're slowly getting to the end of this great drum talk. Let me try to ask you a few questions from our participants, because the questions are pretty interesting, and maybe let's treat them as a sort of speed questions. If you could try to find, if possible, a short, perfect answer for the question, if you know what I mean. At least let's give it a shot. So the first question is from Araf from Mumbai, from India. He's 16 years old, and he's asking, if you were 15 or 16 again, and your goal was to become one of the best drummers in the world, what would you practice as an advanced drummer?
Having the goal of becoming one of the best drummers sounds like a good goal, but it's essentially you want to be a good musician. And that's the focus. What do you need to be a good musician? Play in time, have good time, have good dynamics when you play with other musicians. Listen closely to what the other musicians are playing. Have a good private teacher. Learn how to read music. Those never go out of style. Those basics never go out of style. Exactly. So, my goal was never to be one of the great drummers. It's to be a great musician. And the drumming, I've been fortunate with good teachers and good practice technique, and I don't know what else, but just focus on being a good musician.
Pure essence. Sounds great. So next one. Question from Cloud from Boston. How do you manage going from swing jazz music at the level to playing rock or pop rock at the same high level while still keeping your bebop jazz playing in shape?
That's a really good question, because I found that as a jazz drummer, the key to becoming a very strong jazz drummer is your ride cymbal playing. You have to really play the ride cymbal and be able to really swing hard on a jazz ride cymbal. It's not so important playing rock because you don't play this. You just play, maybe eighth notes or quarter notes. When I was touring with Journey from 2016 to 2020, like there was this period that I played after not playing with them since 1985. I did play, and I did these 6 months tours with Journey. My chops felt very strong, but then I went and played and did some big band gigs right after, and my jazz ride cymbal beat had diminished. So I realized, even though I'm playing rock and playing strong and have my chops feel good, I need to just maintain the jazz ride cymbal, especially up tempo. Especially 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So no substitute for that other than putting in some time and keeping your jazz ride beat going.
Awesome. Let's move to the next question. Something little about Konnakol from Scott. How have you developed the orchestration ideas that you play in the Konnakol and Indian style? Are they inspired by things tabla players play, or are they more derived from trying to mimic the sound of the Konnakol vocalizations?
Okay, it's when my orchestration, when you hear me doing something on the drum set, it doesn't come from tabla. It comes from kanjira or mridangam. Those are the sounds. The South Indian drum sounds is more what my orchestrations are based on. So, for instance, if you play a group of 5, and it's divided 2 plus 3, right, left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A basic embellishment for that is to play 1 extra note in the group of 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, 1, 2. So that's taka taka ta-tum, taka taka ta-tum. Or, with the feet. Right, left, right. I'm using like a double bass. Da, 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 da. So that's not coming from tabla, that's coming from kanjira or mridangam, those kind of tones.
Awesome. So next question from Kate from Seattle. Do you have any advice for how to build fill vocabulary? Maybe an idea or two.
Well, you find some fills that you like and practice them to the point that whenever you hear them in your head and you want to play them, they're there. Which requires a lot of repetition. So find some motions on the drums, find some rhythms that feel good and that feel natural to you, and then spend time experimenting on your drum set and find a lot of different variations of fills, and then practice them to the point where they're always there for you, where you never are thinking too hard or reaching physically too hard. You want to have some headroom, meaning like, you want to have a lot of vocabulary, and the ability to play those ideas at a variety of tempos and a variety of volume levels.
I remember, I think Dom Famler was saying, imitate, assimilate, innovate. So basically copy, learn it, internalize it, and then break it apart.
Yeah, and then you start to come up with your own ideas, but you have to start somewhere.
Exactly. Great. Just a few more questions before we're going to wrap up. The next one is from Andrea. What can you tell us about the application of Jim Chapin's Moeller technique to French grip? And in which situations do you use the different grips you studied?
I don't think the Moeller technique doesn't work in French grip. That's not like, that would be like an accent and 2 rebounds. I wouldn't call that Moeller, but maybe I'm wrong. But it's an accent with a rebound. But I think of Moeller like this, with the palm down. But you can do an accent with rebound with the French grip. But I just think of it as an accent with a rebound and opening and closing the hand. And for me, I like to keep all the fingers on the stick, including the little finger. And then I pull that little finger in, and that I can really pick up the stick with an accent if I want. When I close my hand, open it and close it, like just pulling in that little finger naturally pulls in the other fingers.
That's awesome. Still just a few left. Next one from Dennis from Montreal. I've been having a debate lately about the fulcrum. I was taught to hold the stick with it resting between the first knuckle of the thumb and the index finger, similar to what you are demonstrating. Does it change depending on the grip you are using, French, German, American, etc., or is it simply a different fulcrum point with neither being inherently better than the other? What are your thoughts, or maybe a thought?
Well, I think a fulcrum is where, like for traditional, like this, that's what, I think that's what we mean as for the fulcrum. It's where the stick does this, But if I'm, I do change the position depending on what I'm playing and the volume that I'm playing. Like, I'll hold the sticks more like this if I'm playing, let's say, a pianissimo press roll. And then as it opens up, it's more here between the middle finger and the thumb with some, guidance with this finger. So, and then I go like with the palm, thumbs up, and then here, that's still, it's kind of between these three. So just, here's, my technique, I can sort of analyze it in some ways kind of quickly here, is that with match grip, quiet, it's more like this. And you can see the motions of the sticks are coming in. Open it up a little bit, then they're moving away from me. And then for the sort of the biggest sound, I move to this, There's not a lot of rebound, but I'm just work on being, being able to pick up the stick.
That's fantastic.
I'm not locked into one position. And I call that's I'm trying to be symmetrical. But a lot of music you play, and even though we call it match grip, it's not actually matched. It's non-symmetrical match grip. For instance, if you play on the ride cymbal with your thumb up, but you play on the snare drum with like this. So that's a non-symmetrical match grip. Or the other way around. You might want your snare drum with a little bit lighter sound, but overhand with this. And non-symmetrical goes all the way back to traditional grip, was a non-symmetrical grip. So you don't, even though you're playing match grip, I would say unless people are very studious and really looking at their chops, and a lot of times people play something of a mix. I see this a lot. This hand's over, but this hand's kind of like used to playing on the ride cymbal. Comes to the snare drum like that. And the other thing is, it's very hard to develop good snare drum technique if you habitually play rim shots all the time. You know, and I see young students that come in and play, and they're like, every time they play the snare drum, they're playing a rim shot. Nothing wrong with rim shots if you really want that sound and that feel. But to habitually, only when you play the snare drum, to play rim shots is not going to help you get a nice snare drum technique and a good tone out of the drum. And, you know, play rim shots when you want to play rim shots, but otherwise play the snare drum and get a good sound out of the snare drum.
Great advice. Just a few more left. Let's jump quickly to still back to traditional grip. And there's a question from Fotis from Greece. If you could share some grip tips about outside forward and inside motion in traditional grip. In one of his lessons with Joe Morello, he told me that the grip in traditional grip is on the index finger. Billy Gladstone says the same. Any thoughts from your end on that?
Well, meaning like having the index finger over the stick like this. Well, that's how I learned traditional grip. But I've also found that that's somewhat limiting with the range of motion. And so I have also developed like keeping the fingers very open, and they can even come off the stick. Now, if I'm playing Moeller, I keep the fingers on the stick or over the stick. But for this other, you know, some other kind of playing, I don't need the fingers always over the stick. And in fact, it opens up my wrists and it's a little more relaxed if I open up the fingers. Then I notice, you know, it comes back as I go a little quieter. But to really open up a big range of motion, I take my fingers off and really open things up.
Understood. Last two questions before we're going to wrap up. Steve, we talked about match grip, about traditional grip. Now a little bit about dropping the sticks. So the question is from the person from the chat. I always had problem with dropping the sticks. So I've been using gloves. It helps, but when I try to play without the gloves, I get the feeling of gripping the stick too hard. The fulcrum freezes up and my hands get sore or tingle uncomfortably. What would you recommend for that problem?
I can't answer. I don't know. I don't really know. Yeah, I can't. Because I hold the sticks very loosely, and I occasionally drop the sticks, but I'm not feeling, tingling or pain or anything. So I can't help you. I'm sorry. I just don't really know what to do about that. Other than make sure that you're just always relaxed, very spend time playing just a pad or just a snare drum, not the whole drum set, and really getting used to opening and closing the hand and having a relaxed technique. And then when you go to play the drum set, make sure you continue with that relaxed.
And maybe also if that person is playing with gloves, maybe keep trying to practice without gloves to actually spend enough time maybe to make your hands get used to feeling the stick without anything between the hand and the piece of wood. So might take some time, but maybe that can help. And the last question, Steve, what are your thoughts about playing with click tracks, or the opposite, not playing with it? Do you play with a click track, and do you have any hints how to even find the correct tempo?
Well, how to find the correct tempo, I'm not sure how to answer that, because it depends on the song.
On the song.
Yeah. And if you're using a click to find the tempo, or if you're just feeling what the tempo is. Like when I play with my group, and most groups, we don't use clicks live. Sometimes in the studio we do, but live we don't. And I don't use a click in order to count off a song. But I do the homework and hopefully get very close to what the tempo should be. But I came up at a time before people played with click tracks, when I developed my sense of time, and this goes back to what should a young musician focus on, developing good time. There was generations of drummers that came up that had good time that never played with clicks. And, one of the reasons that Ringo became the drummer in the Beatles is because he had good time, and I don't think they played with clicks. Certainly not in the early years, and probably pretty much never. That's just one example. Led Zeppelin didn't play with clicks either, but John Bonham had good time. And so going back to Hal Blaine, to Philly Joe Jones and Max Roach and Buddy Rich, they all had good time. And that's one of the reasons that I became a working drummer at a young age. I had good time. Now, good time and relatively good time with live musicians is not the same as click track, quantized perfect time. So when I was introduced to having to play to a click track, it did take me a while to get accustomed to that feeling of playing, with no up and down at all of the tempo. And I have to say, there's really nothing wrong with slight speeding up and slowing down pulse-wise when you're playing with a group. And most of the greatest records that we've come to listen to and love, from the beginning of recording in the 20s to until let's say the 70s, they have variations in tempo. But as long as the pulse is good and the feeling is good, and the song has a nice ebb and flow, it's great. It sounds great. It feels great. But it's also a skill that's very important, is to be able to play with a click. So, so I made that transition in around 85, 86, 87, in that area. I was then practicing a lot with a click, and then a lot of the albums that I made after that were done with clicks. So, I've definitely gotten comfortable with that, and people need to be able to do that. Now it's almost the other side of it is to be comfortable playing without a click. If you've grown up playing with a click, then you have to really learn what time feels like and what pulse feels like without a click. So both are necessary. It's not an either or, it's a both and situation where you need to be comfortable with both.
So true. Speaking about time, it's about time to conclude this session, because I mean you're a walking encyclopedia of knowledge. So I'm sure we could spend here the entire evening or the entire day with you, and asking questions and getting great answers. So Claudio, would you like to say something before we gonna disconnect?
Thank you very much, Steve. It's been a great pleasure to have you here. Really amazing.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure, and it's always fun to talk about music, talk about drums and drum technique. So thanks for today. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for being with us. Steve, have a great day. Claudio, have a great evening. And all of you guys, have a great day and evening, depends where you are on the planet drum. And until the next time, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.